Services across the Optus network are slowly being restored after yesterday's massive outage, with politicians and businesses demanding answers. Streaming services like Netflix pressured to boost local content, and why James Hardie's share price surged 14% in minutes. Welcome to Fear and Greed Business News, Australia's best business podcast. It's Thursday, the 9th of November 2023. I'm Adam Lang, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Adam. Were you caught up in the Optus outage yesterday?
No, I wasn't, but I would say almost 2 out of 3 people on the office floor I was on for much of the morning were all Optus customers and all disrupted.
Yeah, amazing. First time that I've experienced such a mass outage of any sort, really.
And it doesn't it tell you just how much we've come to rely on mobile communications? 10 million customers disaffected. It would have affected everybody's day.
I think so.
Sean, immediately after the show, we want everyone to stay listening for your chat with Richard Capp. He's the founder of wallpaper company Milton & King.
Now, we need more wallpaper companies on Fear and Greed. Wouldn't you agree with me on that one?
Is this a Fear and Greed first, Sean?
Oh, I think it probably is. Now, a great little company, Milton & King. They're Toowoomba-based. They've got operations in Dallas, which is where Richard talks to me from. They've also just pushed into the EU. Basically, they've been able to use technology to make wallpaper on demand. Not quite, but sort of. They don't have warehouses of stock sitting there. They come up with designs or people suggest things. They work with places like Pinterest and create wallpaper. And Adam, really exciting, beige is back in Australia, apparently.
You're kidding. Okay. I have so much to learn. I'll be listening after the show. So the main story this morning, Sean, the massive outage at Optus has sent the country's second largest telco into crisis mode, with customers, governments and businesses all demanding answers.
The massive outage affected millions of users, 10 million in fact, including preventing people with fixed lines from dialing 000 for an emergency. The company's boss, Kelly Bayer-Rosmarin, said it wasn't a cyber attack. Remember, a year ago, Optus suffered a massive cyber attack, but rather a very, very rare occurrence. Communications Minister Michelle Rowland urged Optus to be transparent and timely in updates to customers, adding the company appears to have suffered from a fault deep in the core of its network. She said businesses should keep receipts of any additional expenses incurred as a result of the outage. Services were gradually restored across the network from about lunchtime yesterday, though it's not all there yet. A big part of the problem, yesterday at least, was the lack of communication, particularly in those early hours. The outage started around 4 a.m. A statement was posted on Facebook at 6:47 a.m., 2 hours, 47 minutes later. That wasn't updated for several hours. I think it was about 11 o'clock or so. The outage affected Optus's mobile, fixed internet and phone services. That means phone users were unable to make or receive calls or use the internet on Optus's mobile network. Also, users of Optus resellers like Coles Mobile, also they were down, so too Dodo and Aussie Broadband Mobile.
Sean, the impacts were far and wide. Where do we start? A disaster for Optus and a disaster for its customers.
Yeah, I think that's well put, Adam. Some trains in Melbourne, for example, came to a halt as a result of the outage. Westpac, ANZ and Commonwealth Bank all use Optus for telco services. They couldn't take or make calls from their call centres, for example. Some businesses, my local coffee shop, I've got to put in this one, Adam,
no, Sean.
They couldn't use their mobile payments terminals. Now, what I was upset, I said, can I get a free coffee and I'll pay you later in the day? And my local coffee shop, who I go to 4 or 5 times a day, said no. Anyway, I digress. Not happy about that. But things like, like customers couldn't get verification text messages, things that we do all the time.
Authentication texts and all those sorts of things.
Yeah. All in all, about 10 million people were affected. A few things to think about. Australia's small. We have a very limited number of providers of essential services. That's kind of a worry. We're not big enough to have 10 telcos out there like the US might have. We really have 2 big players. So when one goes down, we're all in trouble. The other thing, you mentioned it then, we rely on technology to live nowadays. That kind of worried me a bit yesterday too, that so much of what we do was reliant on the carrier. And just for good measure, don't you think Optus would be somewhat better at handling a crisis after last year's cyber hack? Now, I feel sorry for them. I don't know what the fault is. But surely they learnt from last year, communicate. As Michelle Rowland said yesterday morning, you need to communicate more. It wasn't really until the afternoon when the CEO started going on radio shows and that Optus was prepared to communicate really openly. I don't know how you can go through last year's experience and not do a better job this time around. Anyway, we'll see where we end up today.
Sean, moving on to local markets, how did they perform yesterday?
The S&P ASX 200 closed up 0.3% to 6,995 points. Tech stocks led the way, following a strong close on Wall Street. Real estate, investment trusts and industrials also did well. The materials index was the worst performer. That basically includes BHP, Rio Tinto and Fortescue Metals Group. Now, those big miners fell on a fall in iron ore prices. That was really about concerns on the Chinese economy. Westpac did well, up 1.7%, while Telstra was up 1.8%. Why? Because suddenly a bad news story for Optus is a good news story for Telstra. WiseTech Global, REA and Xero all jumped by at least 1.5%. Best on the day was building materials company James Hardie, up 14%. More on that shortly. Worst was diversified miner South32, down more than 4%, Adam.
And Sean, turning to the rest of the globe, what's happening in international markets?
There was a bit of movement in commodity markets over the past 48 hours, particularly oil. Oil prices dropped to a 3-month low after forecasts of US gasoline usage added to the run of data, suggesting falling demand for crude. Brent fell towards $81 a barrel after surging when Hamas invaded Israel. Oil prices have come back to lower than where they were when that happened on October 7. There are worries about the state of the economy in China. That's a big reason for it. China is actually the world's biggest importer of oil. Russian shipments are running near a 4-month high, so there's plenty of oil on the market. Hence, we're getting downwards pressure on oil prices. Hopefully, that means good news at the petrol bowser. Iron ore prices also dropped. I mentioned that as well. Gold, too, was lower.
Sean, there's been plenty already. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, Anthony Albanese has given the green light to a new Australia-China visa deal to make it easier for visitors and business people to travel between the countries.
He made the announcement as he was leaving Beijing and before heading to the Pacific Islands Forum in Rarotonga, that's in the Cook Islands. The Prime Minister was due to drop off Foreign Minister Penny Wong in Tokyo to brief her Japanese counterpart on the PM's China trip, according to a report in The Australian. In Albanese's final meeting of his 3-day visit, he and Chinese Premier Li Qiang agreed they'd meet annually, restoring what had been a standing arrangement that collapsed with the breakdown of bilateral relations after 2019. Annual ministerial meetings on foreign, strategic and economic matters will also resume, while new reciprocal 3 to 5 year multi-entry visas will kickstart business travel and help bring more Chinese students and tourists to Australia. I will dare say the Prime Minister will, when he gets back in Parliament next week, will be very happy with how the trip went.
Sean, streaming platforms like Netflix, Disney Plus and Amazon Prime cut their spending on Australian TV shows and films last financial year, and that's despite Labor's plans to force them to make more.
Yeah, so new figures released yesterday by the media regulator show Disney Plus, Netflix, Paramount Plus, Prime Video and Stan spent a combined $324 million on just under 1,600 Aussie programs last financial year. $324 million. The previous financial year was $335 million on fewer shows, mind you, but the spend has declined. Spend on Australian-related shows, there's a definition there, things like Disney's Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, Obi-Wan Kenobi, those sorts of shows. Spend on that actually rose quite significantly. It was up about $120 million to $453 million, according to a report in the Financial Review. Arts Minister Tony Burke and Communications Minister Michelle Rowland have said they will introduce quotas to come into effect from July next year. The push for quotas has provoked widespread opposition from streaming platforms and free-to-air television networks. They claim it will push up production costs for everyone. Anyway, we'll see how that one eventuates.
Sean, building materials group James Hardie's share price jumped 14% yesterday, even though its net profit for the 6 months to the end of September was down 6%.
Well, yes. Now, investors really like the result, particularly the parts where James Hardie said they could lift the prices of materials that they sell. For example, in Australia, James Hardie was able to pass through a whopping 15% price increase. While the 6-month result was lower, the final 3 months were actually better. And boss Aaron Erter said he expects renovation work to rebound later next year as homeowners adjust to higher interest rates. What did that do? It pushed up the share price 14%. Erter said the company was gaining market share with its wall cladding and plasterboard products. James Hardie makes about 2/3 of its profit in North America. Erta said there would be a short-term downturn in the North American housing market of between sort of 7 to 14%, but he expects that to rebound as well. End of the day, investors loved it. Share price up 14%.
Sean, Woodside boss Meg O'Neill said oil and gas demand will be around for decades, and the company has a net zero direct emissions aspiration for 2050.
Love an aspiration. I have a net zero aspiration, net zero by like 2025. Doesn't mean I'm going to get there. Anyway, the oil and gas giant will push ahead with almost $40 billion worth of new large-scale projects in Australia, Senegal and Mexico. Woodside is still targeting its first cargo from the massive Scarborough LNG project in Western Australia in 2026. O'Neill said the world's demand for Woodside's products is expected to be resilient in the coming decades as populations and economies grow, with target markets in Asia driving primary energy demand. According to media reports, she also discussed investments Woodside is pursuing in new energy, adding low-carbon ammonia production to the options under consideration, which include liquid hydrogen and carbon capture and storage.
Sean, an Alpha group of staff on an AACo property allegedly routinely bullied, intimidated and harassed their peers, and that's according to an internal safety report from the group.
Yeah, it's a dreadful report, this one. Another instance, a gay contractor working for AACo was allegedly exposed to homophobic slurs while working on one of its outback properties. The same contractor was also allegedly left to work on roofs for hours alone without communications, according to notes of the incidents reported in the Australian Financial Review. AACo owns and operates feedlots and farms covering around 7 million hectares in Queensland and Northern Territory. That's about 1% of Australia's land mass. It has a herd of around 433,000 cattle. Other internal documents detail that a young worker at another property was injured and left unable to walk for several days after being pinned between a charging cow and a boulder in July this year. He was taken to a clinic and airlifted to Darwin after a veteran boar runner, typically not at the site, but just there checking watering points, saw the injured worker, told him to go to a clinic. It is distressing reading this one.
Sean, consulting group PwC will cut about 340 jobs from its 8,000-strong workforce, with the announcement coming on the same day as a key client, Westpac, dumped the group as its audit partner.
Yeah, so Westpac has put its external audit work out to tender and said its current provider, PwC, hasn't been invited to participate. Now, the bank said it's about rotating auditors, and given PwC's been with the bank for more than 20 years, maybe it is a good time to move on. Certainly the scandal around tax advice at PwC isn't helping its efforts to attract customers. According to the Financial Review, PwC's staff cuts are the largest of their kind at a major consultancy in Australia and follow KPMG cutting 300 people, or 3% of its workforce of 10,000, and Deloitte cut dozens of staff members last month. The local major advisory firms are also variously cutting back on recruitment, cracking down on expenses and travel costs, and deferring graduate start dates.
And valet to businessman and philanthropist Mark Beeson, the co-founder of what became the Suzanne Clothing Retail Group, who has died at the age of 99.
Just a handful of retailers who have really changed the face of that industry in Australia, Mark Beeson being one of them. He was born in 1923 to a Jewish family in Romania. He was a Holocaust survivor who fled to Europe after World War II and arrived in Australia in 1947. He married Eva. Now, Mark and Eva Beeson, along with Eva's brother John Gandel, another one of those great retailers, they took over two lingerie shops started by Eva's parents. Those shops started in 1939. These guys took them over. That grew to become the Suzanne Clothing Group, which was sold in 2003 to Beeson's daughter, Naomi Milgram, another great retailer. The group includes Sports Girl, Suzanne and Suzanne Grey brands. Beeson had also been a long-time philanthropist to projects in Israel, including health, science, the arts and conservation.
Sean, in international news, Japan, the UK and the US want to work towards humanitarian pauses in Israel's war with Hamas ahead of a gathering of the Group of 7 foreign ministers in Tokyo.
US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and Japanese Foreign Minister Yoko Kamikawa agreed on the issue at a bilateral meeting in Tokyo earlier in the week. The conflict in Gaza was top of the agenda at the G7 meeting yesterday. Of course, earlier this week, the US Secretary of State was in the region. He did a whirlwind tour of the Middle East. Blinken called for halts in fighting to allow delivery of basic necessities. That was met with more air and ground attacks from Israel, frustration from Jordan, who wants a full ceasefire. Hopefully at this G7 meeting, they can somehow manage to create some sort of humanitarian pause.
Sean, recent high-level meetings have helped improve the China-US relationship, a top Beijing official said, before an expected meeting between Xi Jinping and Joe Biden next week.
It's going to be very interesting, that one. The sit-downs so far have sent out positive signals and raised the expectations of the international community on the improvement of China-US relations, the official said, according to Bloomberg. It comes after the nations traded visits by a host of top officials in recent months, underscores the recent improvement in ties between the two nations. Now, Xi is expected to meet Biden on the sidelines of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in San Francisco. Those would be the first talks in a year between the two most powerful nations, at least at that level, and could firm up some of the recent stabilising in relations.
And that would be a welcome development, Sean. Up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview with Richard Kapp. He's the founder of wallpaper company Milton and King.
Yes, all about wallpaper. I mean, how much more interesting can it be, Adam? Beige is the new black or the new white or something or other. Look, it's a really fascinating story because they've used technology to create a very modern wallpaper company. It's well worth a listen.
I love the business model, more efficient, more ordering, less waste. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, exactly.
That's up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your favourite podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you very much, Adam.
It's Thursday, the 9th of November, 2023. Make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X and Facebook. We hope you have a great day.